has now been 50 years since one of the most terrifying movies to ever have been created graced the screens of our theaters. A Texas Chainsaw Massacre, an absolutely outstanding horror movie from 1974 that traumatized all of those who saw it for generations to come. It left those who watched it with such terror and everlasting scars that it's now spawned 9 movies with even more to come. This movie had done something special. It was one of the very first that incorporated true events and presented itself as a retelling of a horrific real-world story. And before the audience even gets to see a single frame of the monstrous Leatherface, we were greeted with an absolutely chilling opening prologue that left you gripped and feeling a sense of dread from the very start.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young, but had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history: the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And like so many others, the haunting voice of John Larroquette had me wholeheartedly believing this movie was based on a real story. At the time of my first watch, I had never come across a film that had introduced itself this way before. I was enthralled. I was completely living its retelling of this tragic event, and it blew my mind with the fact that there really were maniacs like Leatherface that actually existed. Eventually, it came to light that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, although slightly inspired by serial killer Ed Gein, was not itself a true story. And as bad as it sounded, I was kind of gutted. It took a little something away from the fear I had. However, it never lessened the brilliance of the movie or its legacy, but my own personal anxiety and terror for it certainly got a little duller. But reliving my first experience with Texas Chainsaw really got me thinking about what other horror movies do I love that are actually based or heavily inspired by true stories. And today, my boils and ghouls, I will be doing my top 10 horror movies based on real life events. And yes, a majority of them are going to be embellished and built on. There's going to be extra details thrown in by the directors or the script writers, but that's what adds that extra spice to the movie magic. So without ado, let's get spooky. And starting off at number 10, I have the original 1979 Amityville horror. Yes, again, before we begin, I totally agree that Amityville horror has been overplayed and remade way too many times, and almost all of the remakes have been absolute dog crap. But for me, there's something about the original, the graininess of the film, and the simplicity of the scares, the terror that lies in what you don't see, or what you only see briefly. There's also some really memorable parts, like the walls bleeding, the glowing eyes of the demon pig, and my personal favourite, the blinding of Father Delaney. The Amityville horror was based on a true story. Back on November 13th, 1974, the Amityville home was the gruesome scene of a mass murder. 23-year-old Ronald J. Defoe, using a Marlin rifle, one night decided to murder his entire family while they slept. This consisted of both his parents and his 4 siblings. Ronald was caught for his crimes and he was taken into custody where he confessed. Ronald quoted, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. The voices from the house made me do it." And he was imprisoned for his crimes. But the home, after being cleaned up, eventually was put back onto the market. And just over 1 year later, the Lutz family came in and they purchased the 6-bedroom Dutch colonial home. The Lutz family snatched it up at a bargain price of just $80,000. But of course, that was due to the previous grisly events that occurred within its 4 walls. The Lutz family endured just 28 days before fleeing their newly bought home in fear of their lives. They left everything. All of their possessions were just left behind as they refused to enter back into that home. The Lutz family had said that they'd experienced so much supernatural activity, they no longer felt safe. The father, George Lutz, he was said to have dabbled in the occult anyway, which certainly could have opened a few paranormal doors or even made the situation worse. And it seemed that George himself had been affected the most by the house, although the family had also claimed that they all smelt terrible odours, had seen indescribable green slime oozing down the walls, and they had even seen many of the different family members levitating in their beds. The Lutz family at one point had reached out to a priest to have the house blessed, and when a priest came to the house, he allegedly heard a voice scream, "Get out." Coming in at number 9 is The Conjuring 2. Now, this movie carries a little more of a personal fear which adds to its terror for me. This movie is set right around the corner from where I grew up. And to realize these horrific experiences were happening to a family so close to mine really made me think that this could happen to any of us, anywhere. None of our family homes were truly safe. The real-life telling of the Enfield haunting involved the Hodgson family, and the Hodgson family never moved to a new home or invited these spirits in. Just one day, these events began happening and they had no idea why. The evil spirits would target 11-year-old Janet Hodgson more than any other family member, but it did not play nice with the rest of the family either. There's claims that the family heard strange voices, they witnessed family members levitating, they had seen objects and furniture flying through the air, a curtain wrapped around Janet's neck, almost killing her whilst in bed. The mother, Peggy, firstly decided to call the police for help, but the police deemed that they could not help her with this matter, even after an officer claimed to have witnessed a chair move across the room on its own. The family eventually turned to priests and psychics for help as no one else was offering any kind of relief. Exorcisms and cleanses were done to the home multiple times, mostly to no prevail, but then one day this torment had just stopped. This haunting was said to have lasted for 18 months, a year and a half. And one day, nothing. It terrifies me to think that you don't always need to do something for these paranormal experiences to happen. At number 8, we have a classic shark movie, and that's 2003's Open Water. This is not the best shark movie. There's so many out there that are better than this, but this one is based on a real-life event that I find so scary. So Open Water is a retelling of the mysterious disappearance of Tom and Eileen Lonergan on January 25th, 1998. And the American couple decided to take a vacation to Queensland in Australia. And whilst out there, they decided to take a tour to the Great Barrier Reef, opting in to scuba dive into the shark-infested waters. Now, the couple were experienced divers, so felt comfortable going out further and deeper than the rest of their group. The boat operator calls the group back, getting them ready to leave, and neither Tom nor Eileen had heard. The tour guide, believing he had all of his group back to the boat, completed an incorrect head count and left without Tom or Eileen aboard. The boat operator only realized his mistake 2 days later when they found some of the couple's property on the boat. They could not get hold of Tom or Eileen, and despite widespread search by fishermen, the Navy, and locals, the couple were never found. Many experts say there's a good possibility that they were eaten by tiger sharks. At number 7, we have 2013's The Conjuring. And The Conjuring story is based on the paranormal events that surrounded the Perron family after they moved into a haunted farmhouse back in 1971. The family consisted of Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters, and the family claimed that strange and unusual things began pretty much as soon as they moved into their new family home. Although the hauntings began as small and inconvenient, like items going missing or sound coming from rooms where nobody was in, they soon began to become more and more frightening. The entities that resided in this farmhouse became more confident, began showing themselves to the family. Carolyn, not knowing what to do, began researching the history of the home, discovering that the house had stayed in the same bloodline for generations, and it was the death place for many of these family members. And the most malevolent spirit of them all in this house was a real-life woman called Bathsheba. Bathsheba Sherman had lived in the property in the 1800s and was a rumored Satanist. She had a lot to do with the missing children in the area and was known to be a very horrible woman. This was the entity that was said to have caused the family the most upset. Bathsheba Sherman, the previous woman of the house, was threatened by Carolyn, who now had that position in the home. The family at the time were not able to move out due to their financial hardship, and they all endured 10 horrible years in the property. These horrible events inspired the original Conjuring movie. At number 6, we have Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. I always find this one crazy that it was inspired by a real event. Back on August 18th, 1961, there is an account of thousands of birds raining down from the sky at 3 a.m. in the morning. These birds crashed into homes and cars all around the Capitola and Pleasure Point areas in California. 8 people reported they were attacked by the birds and were even bitten. At the time of the event, no one knew what caused these birds to crash land and act out so aggressively. Some thought that maybe they were getting lost because at the time California had a lot of thick fog and the birds were panicking. But when a second incident occurred 30 years later with a bunch of brown pelicans, scientists discovered that the pelicans were not lost. Rather, they were poisoned by neurotoxic microalgae that made its way into their food cycle. They believe this was the same thing that happened to the birds 30 years ago. These birds were being poisoned and were acting out as their brains were slowly dying. In number 5, we have The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And The Exorcism of Emily Rose is based on the true story of Anneliese Michel, a German woman who died in 1976 after 67 exorcisms. Before this all began, Anneliese was said by friends and family to be a quiet and very religious and very reserved person. One day, Anneliese collapsed and had a seizure. Her parents took her to the doctors. The doctors placed her on medication after believing he had solved out what was wrong with her. The medication did not work for Anneliese, who continued to have seizures and fits. These damaged her brain so severely she completely broke from any kind of reality. With the medication not working, her parents now believed that their daughter was possessed. Anneliese's parents were incredibly religious. They did not think that Anneliese had an illness. They believed that this was demonic possession, and they called up a Catholic church to come and exorcise Anneliese. Upon reviewing the girl, The church also claimed that Annalise's unusual behavior was definitely due to demonic possession, and they gladly carried out the exorcisms. They claimed that Annalise was possessed by multiple demons and bad entities at the same time. They even claimed that one of the entities possessing Annalise was Adolf Hitler himself. Over the course of 10 months, a total of 67 exorcisms had been done. The priests advised the parents to keep their daughter in a semi-starved state, as this weakens the body and the demon, which will make it easier for them to save Annalise. Eventually, on July 1st, 1976, Annalise died from starvation and dehydration. She weighed just 68 pounds, and this is a woman in her 20s. Her knees were snapped, which was likely done by the priest or the parents to prevent her from moving anywhere. The starvation and abuse of a poor girl who needed medical treatment was seen as a criminal offense, and the courts charged the priest and parents with negligent homicide. The priest said that Annalise's condition was just a result of possession, and her parents took happiness knowing their daughter was finally free of the demons they believed were inside of her. Now at number 4 is David Cronenberg's 1988 Dead Ringers. Dead Ringers is based on a true story of identical twin gynecologists. They went by Stuart and Cyril Marcus. Twins were infertility specialists for New York's elite. They definitely had money, they were very, very rich, and they were very sought after by the rich and famous. But their lives were destroyed by barbiturate's addiction. In July 1975, both their bodies were discovered in squalor. Both twins were pretty much naked, surrounded by trash, excrement, and dozens of pill bottles. Now, a lot of people say that they died from fatal convulsions caused by the barbiturate withdrawals after stopping their long-term use of large quantities of the drug. However, the exact cause of their death still remains a mystery to this day, and many people say that they died by suicide pact. So in our bronze spot at number 3, we have 1999's Ravenous. So the 1999 film Ravenous is based on 2 true events. This included the Donner Party, but it is mainly based on the story of Alfred Packer. Alfred, a former Union Army soldier and prospector who ate 5 of his traveling companions after becoming trapped in the Colorado mountains in 1874. So in early November 1873, Packer left Bingham Canyon in Utah to lead a party of 21 men bound for the gold fields near Colorado. The winter of 1873 into 74 was unusually harsh, and just 2 months later, Packer arrived alone. He was looking pretty fit for a man who just completed a huge 2-month trek through the wintry snow. Packer first claimed he had become separated from his 5 companions during a blizzard, and he managed to survive on rabbits and rosebuds. Suspicion grew, though, when it was discovered that Packer had an unusual amount of money and many items belonging to the other missing men. Under questioning, he confessed the real story. He said 4 of the men he claimed had died. He said 4 of the men died from natural causes, from the extreme winter conditions, and the starving survivors ate them. When only Packer and one other man, Shannon Bell, remained alive, Bell went insane and threatened to kill Packer. Packer said he shot Bell in self-defense and eventually ate his corpse. I've always been confused at what kind of movie this is, because I laugh at things in this movie and I don't know if I should laugh or not. I would class this movie as a black comedy, or a horror with specks of comedy in it. Let me know if you've seen this movie and if you laugh at certain parts as well, or whether it's just me. In the number 2 spot, we have the absolute masterpiece that is Jaws. Now, it's said that Jaws was inspired by a series of shark attacks that occurred along the New Jersey coast between July 1st to July 12th, 1916. The attacks was said to have killed 4 people and critically injured another. The summer this year was said to be insanely hot, and with a polio epidemic happening around the New Jersey area, it drew a lot of people outside. And during the summer, one of the things people loved to do the most was head down to the Jersey Shore. Some of the victims included Charles Bruder. He was a Swiss tourist whose legs were bitten off below the knee in Spring Lake. Next, we have Lester Stilwell, who was an 11-year-old child that was dragged into the water by a shark whilst floating. And then we have Stanley Fisher. He was a local tailor who was bitten whilst trying to help Stilwell. While the 1916 attacks are cited as the inspiration for Jaws, Benchley himself said the novel was also inspired by other shark attacks in Massachusetts and New York. Other true events inspired moments in Jaws, including the sinking of the USS Indianapolis in 1945. We can see this in a scene where Quint tells the story of the hundreds of sailors who were left stranded in the Pacific Ocean after their ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. I'm sure you're probably going to guess what my number 1 spot is, but in number 1 we have the legendary The Exorcist. And The Exorcist is the most famous possession movie of all time. In fact, I think this is the movie that created the entire playthrough of how a possession movie is acted out. All of the possession movies tend to play out in the same way. It's because they're all copying the original formula of The Exorcist. William Friedkin's movie did it first, and it does it the best. And sticking to the entire point of this video, this was not based on an original idea. The Exorcist was based on a real life exorcism that took place in 1949. This story revolved around a young 14-year-old boy from Cottage City, and the events were all recorded by a priest called Raymond J. Bishop. This priest had claimed this poor boy had been possessed by a demon. The events began one day when the boy's parents began noticing strange activity in their home, including anti-religious events, like pictures of Jesus and Christ were seen shaking and being thrown off the walls. Now, it is said that the young boy had been allowed to play with a Ouija board, which certainly could have invited some of these more evil spirits in. And as time went on, the boy began acting unusual. Parents took him to get medical help, where at the time they discovered that there was nothing wrong with him. The boy, in the care of the hospital, attempted to escape by slashing his own arm with a spring from his bed. He was then taken away to more in-depth care, where the parents sought after more religious solutions. Priests attempted multiple exorcisms, but the boy was said to have human-like strength and can take down any of the men around him. His voice changed to sound no longer human. He would have welts and blisters appear on his skin. He would even be able to shake and lift the bed that he laid on. It is said that the boy survived his exorcisms and went on to live a pretty ordinary life and died just a few years ago in 2020. And there we have it. That's my top 10 horror movies based on real life events. Let me know down below if you would agree or if you would change it. You may even suggest some horror movies I had no idea were even based on true stories. So be sure to comment. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the darkness.